Okay, welcome. This is a tutorial video about poetry analysis in an exam, and basically we're going to concentrate on what you should be looking for in a poem first and foremost before we actually start looking at examples. Now, before you try and pick anything out from the exam itself, try and remember please what the poet themselves was trying to do. They weren't actually writing a poem so you had to sit there and do an exam on it one day. They had ideas similar to these, and if you get your head into that mind frame at the beginning to try and actually see things from their point of view, maybe it'll become a little bit easier to unravel. What were they trying to say? What were they trying to say? The second important thing to look at is how were they actually trying to do it to you, and this is the most important thing because it's what the examiner is going to look for. They're looking at the words that they use, you're looking at the images that are actually built for the reader, and you're also looking at the way that they put it in the structuring of the poem and through the use of literary techniques and how that actually added to the poem appreciation. Now, I mention these things because ultimately the examiner is going to be looking for very similar to this. The examiner is going to want to know if you can understand the theme and highlight it, if you can actually pick out the different skills that the writer is using in, be it form, language, or words chosen. They're going to look in some exams to see how the poems are similar or different and whether you can actually justify that claim. They're going to be looking to analyse the words and also noting the use of literary techniques. And more than anything, they're going to see if you can personally put in an appreciation of its importance to maybe yourself or your life, or showing that you've just been inspired in some way or intrigued in some way by what you've read. Now, to analyse all of these and to hit all these in one kind of fell swoop, there's an acronym you can remember called SMILE. Now, SMILE stands for structure, meaning, images, language, and effect on you. And basically, if you remember all these 5 points, you should try hopefully to make 3 points of each one of those strands for the poem. So each poem that you analyse, you try and get 15 points ready for it. This will actually allow you to have a bank of knowledge to actually cross-reference poems if you're doing something like the AQA, AOB, or if you're doing like the Welsh Board or the OCR. Then the single poem that you're actually offered, you'll be able to break it down quicker just by analysing these points and then supporting it. And of course, we'll have a look at how you break them down in a little bit. Now, structure on its own is quite simple, and the way the poem is on the page says a lot about it. So ask yourself, how is it set out? How many stanzas are there? How many lines? How many words are there on the line? All these kind of things could give an indication to what the poem's about, or at what state the writer is in that line of the poem, or what they're trying to say about something. And of course, you can look at the punctuation that's used. So if we take an example from the AQA anthology and we'll look at Island Man. Now, if you want to Google that, it's by Grace Nichols, you can find it. Or obviously, if you've got your anthology to hand, just pull it out. And of course, pause the video at any point to double check and reference things and just make sure you understand. Now, Island Man starts with one word on the first line, morning, and it's a short line which gives a very sudden feel to the opening of the poem, and this is used to indicate that the person in the poem has just woken up, so the shortness of the line represents the moment of waking. Also, in the same poem, there's an offset line, groggily groggily. It shows that the person is coming out of his dream uncomfortably because it's way over on the right side of the poem, whereas the rest is on the left. It's indented 2 margins along. This shows how awkward it is for him to wake up to London by the line's placement, as it's awkward in the poem. And that was with the effect that the writer was actually trying to do at that point there. So that's an example of how structure can be analysed. If we move on then, we come to meaning. Now, meaning is basically what is the poem about, and it's about the feelings, the thoughts, what's being conveyed, the attitudes, the ideas, everything kind of coming across, the main parts of the poem. Now, to get higher marks, obviously you have to kind of talk about things in a cross-reference and deeper way, and on the tutorial, the video that follows this, there's actually a breakdown of the examiner's mark sheet, so you can see the examples that we're looking at there. But if we take Half Caste, again, another poem from the anthology which is readily available, you will be able to know straight away that this is about identity and obviously maybe about racism, but it's also about the root meaning of words, ignorance, one person standing up for themselves, political correctness, perhaps speaking on behalf of a race, multiculturalism. You can name 100 different things. It just depends how you want to develop your understanding of it, and they're always really important to pick out. So the next that we have, if we've done structure, meaning, is image. Now, image is basically what you see in the situation, what you're offered, what can you imagine because of what the writer's actually put to you. So if we look at Not My Business, we see that the person is beaten. So we can imagine something quite violent and then stuffed into a car. So we can see the disregard with which these people in this area, in this case Nigeria, are actually treated. And here we have the house was actually booted awake, and this gives us a very strong feel, because we can imagine a bunch of crazed militiamen or army stooges just stomping in with large black boots, just destroying everything they can that's stopping them from getting to the person that they want to drag away. And so there's all these images that are being offered to us to actually make it more vivid and clear to us, and obviously to try and have an effect on us in some way, and to make us consider, remembering that the poet was actually trying to get this across at the beginning. So, for example, in that one there, in the to raise awareness, in that one moment, morning, where it just kind of springs into life. It's like everyone has this morning to themselves, but the shortness of that line really kind of makes us think about what kind of different mornings people may wake up to. Another one with that idea of booted, that might be something that was actually raising awareness of what it's like under an oppressive regime, which could be relevant if you want to talk about effect on things that are actually happening now in countries in the Middle East, etc. Now, if we move on from there, we come to language. Now, language is actually looking at the specific power of the words used. So why was the word boot used instead of kicked? Maybe the idea of kicked would just give us an idea that it was something quite simple, or barefooted, or with a slipper, or maybe it was just with a normal trainer. But the idea of being booted, it's an absolute extension of what a kick could be. I mean, a kick doesn't necessarily have the massive connotation that a boot does, and also you've got the physical description as well of the item of clothing being worn. It's obviously going to hurt a lot more. Imagine if it was steel toe capped, etc. And obviously it just depends what the imagination will do with those words. The other thing that language refers to is the actual techniques that are being used. So, for example, personification or alliteration, and there's quite a few of them to actually pick out in the anthology. So if we have a look across here, we might see, for example, in vultures, there's the metaphor of telescopic eyes. Nothing's changed has alliteration with mean mouth, two scavengers, the oxymoron of small gulf, etc., etc., etc. But it's really important to remember that spotting them alone is easy, and you won't get more than a D for just saying the poem uses, the poem uses, the poet uses. Where you actually get the marks is actually explaining why it's useful or why it's used there. So the alliteration may be useful because it makes the line memorable by the use of consecutive letters. This similarly helps us imagine the situation more clearly, and the personification brings it to life, allowing us to imagine its motives, what kind of character it might be taking. These are the kinds of things that you actually have to remember for these. Now, the E is the last part of this, and it stands for the effect on you. You might want to try and empathize with the character in it, explaining it. You might understand the point of view. It might give you a certain feeling. Anywhere you can generally disagree with anything, again, that's actually put in the first slide, where you're actually thinking about what is it? Do you actually touch upon any of the thoughts? Can you actually relate to any of the thoughts that they're sharing? Has this made you aware of something that you've never seen before? Is this something that's commented on something that was happening, and you've got a parallel to comment on now in your time? Any of these things will actually help you get a better understanding and a better range of things to write about in your exam. So smile, in essence, there is all that you want to pick out, but obviously we need to use this information. Now, the logic behind it is to remember that smile helps you to unlock the poems. You can start to see things, picking them out, hopefully. But the most important thing, ordering it, is going to be done with M as the central base, the meaning. The image, the structure, and the language all support the meaning. So basically they're trying to get it across through the image, through the way they've structured it, through the language, and ultimately it's hoping to have an effect on you. And that's why meaning is the actual most important part. So we'll look now at a couple examples of how we can actually do this. If you're actually going to be planning your essay, or when you should I say you're actually going to be planning your essay, it's important to actually note that the way that you're building this is M is ultimately the structure, the outline of the house, and then the rest of it's all the kind of trimmings, fittings. So in this case, if it was to use a cheesy metaphor, if M was the structure of the house, then the L would be the doors, the S would be the windows, and the E would be the carpet, or I would be the furniture, things such as this. It's like everything's building around that. Whereas if you just had some doors on their own out in a field, then obviously they would just be completely irrelevant. You don't have much just picking out the language on its own. It's got to support that structure, that house, which in this case is the meaning. So let's have a look at an example. Here we're going to look at a complete example which is half decent. Island Man is all about homesickness and the dream of yesterday. That's part of the meaning there. The writer presents us with the waking man's dreams of home, and here comes the image, the sun surfacing defiantly. This shows a pride from the word defiant in his heritage and reflects how warm life was there for him physically and mentally. So there we've talked about the image and more of the meaning. This is reinforced by the alliteration of the S, which makes the line stand out, which we're looking at there as language, and it makes us feel sorry for the man who later has to go to work on the dull grey North Circular with the thoughts of home plaguing him all day. The contrast between his past situation and present situation is powerful and clear, making us wonder why he swapped countries. And as you can see just in this section, which again you can pause at any time, the underlined parts here is actually the effect on you or the effect on the reader. It's basically referencing in that way. Now to move on with an example, just remember to be able to write like this is just threading all together. So for each poem that you're studying, or for the poem that comes up in the exam, it's best to actually just write out smile points and 3 of each, so you end up with 15 all in all. So we'll be looking at it now for Nothing's Changed, another of the poems in the anthology, and some of the simple things it can actually be related to is oppression, anger and racism, and they all come out. So with simple writing, if the question is just about meaning, then we might want to write something like this. This is linking all 3 of the meaning points together in one. Nothing's Changed is a poem all about oppression. We see this from the line boy again, as this shows the writer still feels as if he lives in an oppressive time where he is less of a man than the white man. It is also about racism, as the whites have a fancy brash restaurant while the blacks have a working man's cafe. It is also about anger, as he says his hands ellipsis for a bomb, showing he wants to change things even if it has to be by violence. So there's a link of all the meaning things that we can actually pick out. Now that would still get me half decent marks because I'm clear, I'm effective, I know what I'm talking about, and obviously it all depends on what question's being asked. But this is clear but not very high level. To do more of a high level analysis, we want to show, like I said earlier, how the others support the M. So here we're going to look at how structure has actually helped it. Nothing's changed. We're starting with the same example as last time, so you can go back and forward in the tutorial video to see the difference. Nothing's Changed is a poem all about oppression. We see this from the line boy again, as this shows the writer still feels as if he lives in an oppressive time where he's less of a man than the white man. We are also shown the idea of going back to the past. The last line of the poem and the title are the same, Nothing's Changed, showing the reader we have not progressed at all from where we have started. And this is actually important because there we've actually talked about the structure. The very first thing we read in the title is again the very last thing we read at the end. So this kind of cyclical structure, it references that we haven't moved on at all. And this is how we start building our paragraphs. So now we'll try a version, just again building on it and adding an I now. So before this, the rest of it's exactly the same, but here we have slightly elongated. The idea that the inequality and oppression have always been around is represented clearly through the line, it's in the bone. This refers to the natural order of equality and inequality in South Africa, and that regardless of the changes that were supposed to happen under Mandela, the status of black people is the same. They are still unequal. And that's the idea of the image being transported there. It's in the bone. It's natural to us. There's nothing that perhaps will be done about it in such a short space of time.